classroom, or even if they are at home but that attend the lectures in class, in presence the other days. There are 2 students here in the classroom, and first one is here and the second one is there. They are looking for a group, and so if there is some students, some group that are only 5 components, please, okay, how many students? 5, so for example, you can add, okay, please send only an email to me with your name and the number of the group, okay? And some other students, there is another colleague that is waiting for a group. So if there are some groups composed of 5 students, there is a colleague waiting for a group. Okay, no volunteers right now, but I think that next Monday, when the students will be a greater number of students here in the classroom, I come to find a solution. Okay? Okay, very good. Oh, we can go ahead. Probably we are finding a solution immediately. Okay, very good. And we can go ahead with the impairment test. So, for the impairment test, what we need to what we need to do is to compare the recoverable amount and the carrying amount. The carrying amount, when the impairment test is conducted, having regard to the cash generating unit, okay? The carrying amount is composed of non-current assets, so brands, patents, software. Okay. Brand, patent, software, property, plant, machineries, and so on. So all the non-current assets that are related to the specific cash generating unit. Keep in mind, cash generating unit means business unit, okay? And it can be the geographical areas, the platforms, or I don't know, for Telecom Italia, there is just one single big cash generating unit for all the Italian activities, for example, and another cash generating unit that is linked to the Brazilian activities for Telecom Italia, okay? But what is important is to find all the assets, non-current assets, and generally speaking, liabilities are not included, because this test, the goal of this test is to verify the recoverability of assets irrespective of how they are funded. So financial liabilities are not included. In the carrying amount, so we include only tangible assets, intangible assets, if there is a goodwill, also goodwill. Some companies, for practical reasons, they include also operating liabilities like trade payables and trade receivables. But generally speaking, the cash generating unit carrying amount is composed of tangible and intangible assets. Then, as we discussed some minutes ago, the recoverable amount is the higher of fair value less cost of disposal, or value in use. Sometimes it is difficult to determine the fair value. Fair value is the value, the price that the company would receive in order to sell the asset. But if our unit of analysis is a cash generating unit, is a business, it is not so easy to determine the market price of a business. Okay? So in most of the cases, when the impairment test is done, is performed, companies determine the value in use. Okay? The value in use can be determined either with reference to a single asset or more often to a group of assets. Okay? For the fair value is not defined by IAS 36, but the definition of fair value is in IFRS 13. Cost of disposal are legal costs, but the most important part are due to cost of removing the assets. Okay? No particular issues here. The problem is determining the fair value. And in many cases, I repeat again, it is not possible to determine the fair value of a business unit, of a cash generating unit. It is easy to determine the fair value of a building, but determining the fair value of a business unit is more complex. So at the end, companies determine the value in use. The value in use is the present value of the future cash flows that we expect to have from the asset or from the cash generating unit. So the value for determining the value in use, we need to first determine the expected cash flows. Cash flows at the end of year 1, at the end of year 2, at the end of year 3. But we need to compute a present value. Okay? So each cash flow must be discounted for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It depends on when the cash flow is expected. Then, suppose that I use, in this case, the PowerPoint, just in order to make with you this analysis. Suppose that we are determining the value used here at the end of 2021. Okay? This means that the company prepares budget for 22. Then probably there is a business plan that covers 3 years, so 23 and 24. Okay? So the company has to look at the cash flow forecast for 22. And this cash flow must be discounted for 1 year. Then the cash flows expected for 23. This cash flow must be discounted for 2 years. Then the cash flow expected for 24, discounted for 3 years. But there is a problem now, because we are talking about a business. For example, for Telecom Italia, all the Italian activities of Telecom Italia. As you can imagine, at the end of the business plan, we cannot say that the activity of Telecom Italia will have a value equal to 0. Do you agree? Because for businesses like Italia, but also the businesses of FCA or Moncler or E&I or whatever, the company, in order to prepare the business plan, generally speaking, for the business plan is considered a period of 3-5 years, because it is very difficult to make projections beyond 5 years. But it doesn't make sense to suppose that at the end of the business plan, the value of the company is not 0. There is a value. Do you agree with me? I repeat again. Suppose that this is the impairment test for a business unit of a company. For example, a company that produces tomato sauce. Okay? So we define all the assets that we need to use in order to produce the tomato sauce. So we have all the plant, the buildings, some software, and so on. And this is the carrying amount. Then we need to compute the value used. In order to compute the value used, we need to estimate the future cash flows that this business, tomato sauce, can generate. And suppose that, according to our business plan, the company expects to generate 10 euros of cash flow in 22, 12 euros of cash flows in 23, and 13 euros of cash flows in 24. The present value is, the value used is the present value of these 3 cash flows. But it is not enough, because the plant that is used in order to generate the tomato sauce, the company expects to use it also in 25, 26, 27, 28. So at the end of the period of the business plan, we cannot say that after this period, the company is not able to generate any other cash flows. No, the company is expecting to continue to generate cash flows in 25, 26, 27, 20, and so on. The problem is that the business plan covers only explicitly 3-5 years. For these reasons, at the end of the business plan, in order to determine the value in use, a terminal value is computed. Terminal value means that we need to make an estimate of the possible value at the end of the explicit periods covered by the business plan. This terminal value is discounted. Okay? So 10, the cash flows of 10 expected for the first year is discounted for 1 year. 12 is discounted for 2 years. 13 for 3 years. And the terminal value for 3 years, because it's the value expected at the end of the business plan. Is this clear for everybody? So these figures are derived, this figure derives from the budget and the business plan. The budget for the first year, the business plan for the other years. So if I go back to the slide, look at how the value use is computed. The present value of the cash flows plus the present value of the terminal value. Is this clear for everybody? This is something that requires skills, competencies, not only of accounting, but also competencies in finance, in order to determine in the right way the interest rate to be used for the present value and also the cash flows. Is this clear for everybody? I will give some other examples, okay? But what is important is that the value used, the value of an asset, the value of a group of assets, depends on the expected future cash flows. And the company has to make an estimate of the future cash flows that is possible to generate from a specific business. Selling tomato sauces, selling shoes, manufacturing and selling cars, providing telecommunication services. The cash flows are forecasted using the budget and the business plan. The problem is that the business plan can cover a limited period. In most of the cases, from 3 to 5 years. At the end of the business plan, we cannot say that after this period, the business is not able to generate any other cash flows. This is not true, because the company is expecting to continue to use the asset, and so to continue to generate cash flows. But since it doesn't make sense to prepare business plan with a too long period, in order to take into account the fact that after the end of the business plan, we expect to have other cash flows. This, in order to perform the impairment test, a terminal value is computed. Terminal value is a sort of summary, a single number that is the summary of the cash flows expected in 25, 26, 27, 28, until it depends. Okay? In many businesses, it is not possible to forecast the net. And according to IAS 36, cash flows must be reasonable, must be based on supportable assumption. It is necessary to use the most recent budget and forecasted approved by the management. The period covered by forecast is generally speaking of maximum 5 years, unless some particular situations. And projection beyond the period covered by the budget must be done, but according to a steady or declining growth rate, in order not to overestimate the terminal value. Okay? Estimates of future cash flows must include not only the inflows, money collected from the sale of shoes, tomato sauces, cars, telecommunication services, but of course taking into account also the outflows for buying the raw materials, for employees, for services, for maintenance, and so on. The terminal value, this is mathematics. I'm not interested in doing something that is not my job, but it is very important, not for the exam, I mean, but to know, to learn that the terminal value, generally speaking, is computed as a perpetual annuity. You are not requested for the exam to compute everything, but if when you read financial statements, you read the description on how the terminal value is computed. In most of the cases, the terminal value is based on the cash flow of the last period, in our example, the cash flow of the year 24, imagine that the company is able to produce these cash flows in perpetuity. This is an assumption, of course. Okay? During the corporate finance course, you will have the opportunity to study more in depth how terminal values are computed, and during the course of mathematics, financial mathematics, you will have the opportunity to analyze more in depth why the present value of a perpetual annuity is computed in this way. Okay? I don't want to spend time in explaining you why this is the formula. But what is important for me is that you understand that the value used is the sum of two parts. The present value of the explicit cash flows plus the present value of the terminal value. Then, okay, if we go to the slide number 18, 17, sorry, because I have added a slide, 17. There is another problem, that is the discount rate. The discount rate should reflect the time value of the money. €1 today is better than €1 tomorrow, but also the risks that are specific for that asset, for that specific cash generating unit. This is the problem. How to compute, how to determine an interest rate, a discount rate, that is able to incorporate the risks of the activity. As you can imagine, it is not the same to operate in the telecommunication industry or in the car industry, in the oil and gas industry, or in a technological startup. The risk is completely different. The higher the risk is, the higher the interest rate, the discount rate is. If you read the standard, there are some suggestions that are not possible to implement in practical. So at the end, all the companies uses, in order to make the present value, the weighted average cost of capital. I'm sure that at least part of you know the weighted average cost of capital. Okay? The weighted average cost of capital is, as the name suggests, a weight of the cost of capital. The cost of capital is the cost of equity and the cost of debt. The cost of debt is quite easy, very easy, because this is the interest rate paid by the company, the average interest rate paid by the company. Okay? The problem is here, how to determine the cost of equity. This is the problem. There are, again, this is a matter of finance and not accounting. There is a model that is the capital asset pricing model. According to this model, the cost of capital is equal to the free risk plus a premium for the risk. Again, the problem is how to determine the beta, that is a measure of the volatility and so of the risk. Do not worry, okay? In the sense that I don't want you be able now to compute everything. We will provide the discount rate, okay? But my goal is to highlight that there are a lot of interconnections between the different subjects that you are going to study during this program. Now we are studying financial statements. We are looking at a very important process, the impairment test. But in order to perform the impairment test, financial competencies are necessary. Okay? Because it is necessary to be able to determine the discount rate. And the discount rate is based on the weighted average cost of capital. This is finance, corporate finance. Okay? So my goal here is to highlight the fact that there are a lot of interconnections between the different subjects. You are attending a master degree, so now your goal is to try to put everything together and not to study simply for financial statements, for international GAAP, and then once the exam is passed, you forget everything. This is not the right approach, okay? In order to read and prepare financial statements, finance competencies and skills are fundamental. So please, when in some months you will discuss with the professor the weighted average cost of capital, please try to remember the fact that the weighted average cost of capital is fundamental for financial statements under IFRS. Okay? Is this clear for everybody? Just to give you an idea, suppose that there is a company that has a specific cash generating unit. A cash generating unit, for example, silence please at the end of the classroom. The cash generating unit is, for example, the business unit of product A. Shoes, TV, cars, whatever you want. Okay? we need to perform the impairment test. In order to perform the impairment test, we need, first of all, to determine the carrying amount of the cash generating unit. And this means that, for example, we need to consider all the property, plant, and equipment used by the company in order to manufacture and sell the product A. Suppose that the carrying amount of property, plant, and equipment is used for the product A is 1,000. Then we need to consider all the intangible assets. Of course, the intangible assets, patents, software, brands, used in order to manufacture the product A. And suppose 500. Okay? This means that the total carrying amount of this cash generating unit is 1,500. Okay? This is the carrying amount, the assets that refer to the cash generating unit product A. We need to determine the recoverable amount. Okay? The recoverable amount is the higher of the fair value less cost of disposal and the value used. Okay? As I said before, in most of the cases, the fair value is not available because it is difficult, very difficult to determine the value, the market value of the business product A. Very difficult. So we need to compute the value used. If something is not clear, you can ask me to repeat. In order to compute the value used, the company needs to estimate the future cash flows expected from this cash generating unit. So, future cash flows expected from the cash generating unit product A. Okay? We are at the end of year 0. This is the carrying amount at the end of year 0. So we need to make an estimate using budget, business plan, and so on of the future cash flows expected from the cash generating unit for year 1, for year 2, and for example, for year 3. Okay? The future cash flows from year 1 is derived from the budget, the other 2 from the business plan. Okay? Suppose 600, 500, and 700. Okay? But these are nominal cash flows. We need to discount them. So in order to compute, to determine the recoverable amount, the company has to estimate the weighted average cost of capital. Suppose it is 8%. 8%. Where is it? Okay. 8%. Okay? So we need to compute the present value of the future cash flows using 8% as discount rate. The first cash flow must be discounted for 1 year. Do you agree? The second one for 2 years. The third for 3 years. Is this clear for everybody? But it is not enough, because we need to estimate also the terminal value. In most of the cases, the terminal value is considered to be equal to the last cash flows, 700, divided by the discount rate. This is, I repeat again, this is the formula in order to have the present value of a perpetuity, an annuity perpetuity. Okay? So, if we suppose to be able to obtain 700 in perpetuity, the terminal value is equal to 8,750. But we need to discount this amount for 3 years. Okay? If we sum up the present value of the first as future cash flows, of the second, of the third, and of the terminal value, 8,585, this is the value used. Okay? Yes, Elena, if I'm not wrong, yes. The terminal value, there are different ways of determining the terminal value. In most of the cases, the terminal value is computed as the present value of a perpetual annuity. So the last cash flows 700, so the cash flow that is expected for the last period of the business plan is considered to be a cash flow that the company can obtain in perpetuity. And the present value of an annual annuity in perpetuity is simply the cash flow 700 divided by 8%, like it is written in the slide. Okay? I repeat again, it's a task of my colleague of mathematics to explain you why the present value of a perpetual annuity is computed by dividing the annuity by the discount rate. The final result is this one. This is clear for everybody? And I move here, okay, the work, okay? So, the value used is 8,485. Any needs to recognize a loss in this case? How much is the carrying amount? 1,500. How much is the recoverable amount? It is equal to the value used. The value used is higher than the recoverable amount, so no problems. We maintain the carrying amount of our assets. Is this clear for everybody? I repeat again. At the beginning of the lecture, I highlight the fact that the objective of this test is to verify whether the carrying amount is recoverable or not. In our exercise, the carrying amount is 1,500. The recoverable amount is 8,000 and something. So, since the recoverable amount is higher than the carrying amount, no losses are recognized because the test has confirmed the fact that the investments are still recoverable thanks to the money collected from the sale of the products. Is this clear for everybody? Now, if it is clear, this is an example of the impairment test. Impairment test. Example number 1. Now, for me it's very easy. I copy and paste Excel and I start to change something. Suppose now everything remains equal, but the amount of property, plant and equipment, suppose is 8,000, and the amount of intangible assets, suppose is 1,000. Okay? No changes in the assumption about the value use and future cash flows and so on. So, look at the figures now. The carrying amount is 9,000. The recoverable amount, that is the value used, is 8,485. So, we need to recognize an impairment loss. How much is the amount of the impairment loss? The difference between 9,000 and 8,485. So, in this case, impairment loss for the difference between the recoverable amount and the carrying amount. So we need to recognize a loss of 514,000. I hope that with this very simple example, the procedure now is clearer. Okay? Any questions? Is everything clear? Now, another copy and paste. 12th example. Okay. Look at what happens. Everything is equal, but I change the discount rate. Keep in mind, the higher the discount rate, the lower the present value. So the higher the discount rate is, the lower the present value is. Look at what happens in the figures. If instead of 8%, I write 9%. Look at the loss with 8% loss of 500, 9% loss of 1,582, 10%, 2,000 of losses. Is this clear, the mechanism? I repeat again. The determination of the discount rate, the weighted average cost of capital, is crucial because the higher the discount rate, the weighted average cost of capital is, the lower the value used is. This means that if the company estimates an 8% instead of a 9%, the amount of the impairment loss is different, completely different. Right? With 8%, 500, 9% is 3 times, almost 3 times. Is this clear? Now, look, we remain at 8%, but if the last cash flows expected instead of 700 is 500, look at the results. Of course, the lower the cash flow is, the value used, the lower the value used is. But the last cash flow is very, very, very important because it's the basis for the terminal value. In some real cases, then it is a little bit adjusted in order not to overestimate the terminal value. But at the end, the starting point for the terminal value is the cash flow of the last period of the business plan. And if instead of 700 we have 500, the loss is to be recognized is completely different. These are projections based on budget and the business plan. This is why the IAS 36 states that cash flows must be based on reasonable and supportable assumptions, because it's fundamental. Of course, not in the case 1. Not in case 1. Okay? Case 1, there are no problems. The carrying amount is so low that it doesn't matter, because even if we use 9%, even if we use 500, there are no problems, because the carrying amount is very, very, very low compared to the value used. The problem is in case 2 and case 3, where the carrying amount is very, very close to the value used. Is this clear for everybody? These examples are just to show you how sensitive and crucial is this test. And this is particularly true when in the carrying amount there is also goodwill, or if in the intangible assets there is a grant with indefinite useful life. Because both goodwill and this type of grant are not amortized. And the impairment test is the only way to support, to justify the amounts shown in the balance sheet. This is clear? This for everybody? This is very important. It's not a matter, I'm not really interested in all the technicalities, but I am interested in explaining you the meaning, and because this test is so crucial, so sensitive, so relevant, in particular when there is goodwill, when there are brands with indefinitive useful life. Is this clear for everybody? If it is clear, just few other things. In our example, the loss to be recognized is the difference of the recoverable between the recoverable amount and the carrying amount. 514, or it depends on the amount of the value used. Pay attention. If there is goodwill, the loss must be, first of all, attributed to goodwill. So if there is goodwill and if there is an impairment loss, the first asset to be deleted is goodwill. If goodwill is not present, or if the amount of goodwill is not enough in order to absorb the loss, the impairment loss is attributed in proportion to the carrying amount of the other assets of the cash generating unit. Property, land, intangible assets, and so on. Then, sometimes it could happen that 2, 3, 4, 5 years after the recognition of a loss, an impairment loss, maybe something changes again, and the company has to re-perform, to do again the impairment test, so to compute again the recoverable amount. And if in the past the company recognizes an impairment loss on, for example, property or plant, and now when the impairment test is done again, the recoverable amount is higher now than the carrying amount, the previous losses now is eliminated. So there is a so-called reversal. A gain is recognized in the income statement when, in the subsequent periods, the recoverable amount becomes again equal or higher than the carrying amount of the asset. I repeat again. Suppose our case, the example number 2. In year 0, we need to recognize a loss of 514. Why? Because the value used is lower than the carrying amount. Then maybe in year 4, cash flows starts again to increase because of a change in the market. So there are signals that the negative events of the year 0 now probably are no more present. So the company has to perform another impairment test to compute another recoverable amount in year 4 taking into account projection for year 5, 6, 7. Okay? And it could happen so that when the new impairment test is performed in year 4, maybe now the recoverable amount is higher than the new carrying amount. So it doesn't make sense to maintain the impairment loss. Now the previous impairment loss can be eliminated. In the accounting language, when an impairment loss recognized 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago is eliminated, in accounting language, this is a reversal. This is not a revaluation. Pay attention. It's not a revaluation. This is simply the elimination of a previous loss. Is this clear for everybody? This is very, very, very important. We are not revaluating the asset at an amount that is higher than its cost. No. We are simply eliminating the losses that were recognized 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Reversal. Pay attention to this sentence. This is very important for the exercises. When there is a reversal, pay attention. Again, I repeat, we are not revaluating the asset. We are using the cost model. Bear it in mind, cost model. So we need to pay attention because the reversal cannot exceed the carrying amount, which could be determined without the impairment. Okay? So the maximum amount of the reversal is in order to have the same carrying amount that the company would have without the impairment that the company did 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. This is just in order to avoid the revaluation. Revaluation is not allowed, is not permitted. The reversal is the elimination of a previous losses, but with a cap. When we eliminate a previous losses, the new carrying amount of the asset cannot exceed the carrying amount that the asset would have had without the impairment loss. Do not worry, with the exercises you will apply in practice this part. Okay? But the logic, the objective is that the model used is cost model. Companies cannot use the reversal of impairment test in order to reevaluate their assets. This is forbidden. Forbidden. So the maximum amount of an asset is the amount that the asset would have had without impairment. Okay? And it is impossible, forbidden, to make the reversal of the goodwill. Goodwill, once impaired, cannot be reversed. Property, plant, equipment, intangible asset, impairment losses can be reversed. Goodwill, impairment losses of goodwill cannot be reversed. Never. There are a lot of disclosures for the impairment test, but instead of reading all the slides, I think that it is more useful to have a look at a real impairment test, or better, information of a real impairment test. This is E&I. The consolidated financial statement is from page 106. Okay? And in particular, income statement. Look here. This item. Net impairment losses, negative brackets, loss, reversal. So when the impairment loss is eliminated, gain, positive, of tangible and intangible assets and also right of use assets. Look at the amount in 2020 and in 2019. 3.1 billion, 2.1 billion. Negative. So impairment losses. Why? Because for some assets, tangible and intangible, the value in use was lower than the recoverable amount for 3.1 billion. To be more precise, this 3.1 billion is a net amount. New impairment losses and reversal of old impairment losses. If we go to page 206, here we can find some disclosures about the procedure. As you can read, impairment of non-financial assets, tangible assets, intangible assets, and also right of use assets. They are tested for impairment whenever events or changes in circumstances indicate that the carrying amounts for those assets may not be recovered. But the recoverability is not assessed with reference to the single assets, but with reference to the cash generating unit. Okay? Then the recoverability of a cash generating unit is assessed by comparing the carrying amount and the recoverable amount. That is the higher of the fair value less cost of disposal and value use. The value use is the present value of the future cash flows and the terminal value, the cash flows expected to be obtained from the disposal of at the end of the useful life. Reasonable and supportable assumptions. These words are not any E&I choice, because are exactly the same words that I used in the presentation, and I simply made, where are they? Here, okay? Copy and paste from the standard. So, reasonable and supportable assumptions. In particular, E&I, oil and gas. 10, 12 years ago, the price of oil was very, very high. So oil and gas companies, 10, 12 years ago, they decided to invest, to spend a lot of money in new investments, supported by a price of the oil that was very, very high. Now, the price of oil is more or less half compared to the price of some years ago. So this is an external indicators that there is something that is not working as intended. This is not internal, because it doesn't depend on E&I. It's a market condition that is completely different. And so they spent some words, some sentences, in order to explain that the price scenario is approved by the board of directors, and it is based on the management planning assumption. Moreover, oil and gas. It's not the most interesting industry today. I mean, in the past, they generated a lot of margins. Probably they are going to start again to generate margin. But today, investors are looking for sustainable investments. So the investors pay attention to the environment. And E&I, as well as British Petroleum and all the other companies, they need to comply with laws regarding the CO2 emissions. So if they, or on voluntary basis, or in some countries there are the mandatory. So if they generate too much emissions of CO2, they have to pay. They have to buy this emission trading scheme. So for them, for the company's decarbonization strategy, this is a key point. This means a lot of money spent in order to, for example, for them there is the forestry project. Okay? On the one hand, they explore, they drill. On the other hand, they try to plant new forests. But this means a lot of money to be spent. Is this clear for everybody? And so they try to explain how all these key points of the strategy are included in the impairment test. Here you can see that there are references to the weighted average cost of capital. Then, if we go to the slide, to page 225, we can see the impairments and reversal. This is property, plant, and equipment. So this means for tangible assets. And as you can see, impairment are mainly for the exploration and production wells, plant, and machinery, 1.5 billion, and for other plants and machinery. The reversal, so the elimination of previous impairment losses, they amount to 648 million. And if we go to that, you can find then the same information also for intangible, but for intangible, right of use asset, intangible assets, okay? As you can see, for E&I, intangibles are not so significant. For E&I, the problem relies on property, plant, and equipment. For the type of industry, the type of activity. And if we go to the page 232, okay, there is a specific note with more specific disclosure about the impairment test of tangible, intangible assets. Okay? Here you can find, for example, the fact that E&I, in order to prepare the business plan, in 2020, revised the scenario for the oil price. And now the scenario is a long-term Brent price of $60 per barrel in 2023. 1 year before, when they performed the impairment test in 2019, they used $70 per barrel. So this is an industry where the projections are very, very difficult, and if you were an analyst, it is very, very interesting to read this part, because this part, it's a summary of the strategy of E&I. The last things, then I realized that it's Friday and probably you are tired, but E&I, as all the other companies that performs impairment tests, they are obliged to make the so-called sensitive analysis. It's the analysis that we did together. I mean, we recognize a loss of 514 euros with this projection and this discount rate. Sensitive analysis. What if the discount rate, instead of 9%, is 8.5%? The losses would be greater. Okay? E&I does the same type of analysis. So the reasonableness of outcome of the impairment is tested. And so, for example, they try to use the scenario of decarbonization developed by the International Energy Agency. But reads. So they decided to perform a stress test. What if the scenario will be the scenario of the Energy Agency, the International Energy Agency, instead of the scenario projected by E&I management? The stress test indicates a loss in the value in use equal to 11% compared to the base case. The base case originated an impairment loss of 3 billion. Okay? But in the case of the scenario of the International Energy Agency, the impairment loss could be greater. But they say that this sensitivity do not, however, represent the management best estimate of any losses, because they say, of course, this is the worst scenario, the worst possible scenario, but in that case, we don't stay there simply waiting. We will act in some way, and so we think that we will be able to put in place actions in order to try to limit to put a limit to these losses. But this part is very, very, very important to be read in the financial statements that you have to discuss. As you can imagine, in some industry, the impairment test is not a problem. Okay? If you read, for example, Montclair financial statements, Montclair has very good margins, very good margins. In 2020, margins were lower compared to 2019, but very, very good. So for Montclair, the impairment test is not a problem. For Stellantis, for oil and gas companies, for telecommunication companies, so in industries that are facing technological changes, market changes, in the oil and gas industry, a change in the perspective in the of investors and customers, impairment test is a very, very, very sensitive part of financial statements, because as we have just seen, we are talking of 3 billion of impairment losses. And look at the loss in 2020 of E&I, 8.6 billion, of which more than 3 because of the impairment loss. Is this clear for everybody? Okay. So, next Monday, lecture in the morning at 8:30. Please have a look at the semi-annual report at the end of June 2021 of Stellantis in order to understand the choice of the new group, and we will continue with leases. Have a nice evening, and please try and download the consolidated financial statement of the company assigned, because the next week is crucial for you in order to do the project work, in order to make all the questions, possible questions from the consolidated financial statement. Have a nice evening.